So I'll start. Are there any apologies?
There's apologies from Angela Wallace, who's on leave.
Yeah, right too. And any declarations of interest?
Sorry, Fiona, Linda Benny also sent apologies.
Linda Benny. Okay, thank you. Right, okay, cheers. And any declarations of interest? No? Okay, so we'll turn to the minutes of the last meeting here on the 26th of February. Are there any corrections to the minute? If not, are we happy to approve? Yes, great, fantastic. Right, and the action log. Are there any questions or comments around the action log? No? Excellent. Okay, well, in that case, I'll move into our agenda proper and the IJB Strategic Risk Register and Clinical and Care Governance Committee, and that report is by Suzanne.
Thanks very much, Chair, and it's a really punchy title, isn't it? So the report is summarising the initial discussions we've had to explore how we better align our relevant risks in the IJB Strategic Risk Register to the work of the committee, and importantly, how we provide assurance to committee around those risks that might relate to sort of care or just more broadly. So this work's involved discussions with the head of clinical governance and corporate risk managers. So the report sets out the work that's ongoing for committee's information. So at section 4.1, it notes that work started to review the IJB Strategic Risk Register, and that started with a workshop we held on the 21st of April this year and to rescope our strategic risks. And further work's going to be done to with relevant risk owners to define this a little bit further, report initially to the Health and Social Care Partnership Senior Leadership Team, and then on to Audit Committee. 4.5 of the report notes that internal audit of the IJB risk strategy is currently underway, and the findings of the audit will inform this further work that we're doing as well. NHS colleagues through the Clinical Governance Working Group are mapping clinical governance structures that demonstrate the assurance and escalation flow through NHS Forth Valley, and we're working closely with them in collaboration to reflect this work into the HSCP structure with initial work reporting to the leadership team and then to Clinical Governance Committee. So in considering how assurance will be provided to the committee, we'd welcome your views and thoughts on this. It's a paper under development and it's a piece of work under development, and we will be bringing back updates to the committee. But in conclusion, at this stage, we're asking you to note the work of the as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. I suppose I've got one question before I open it up in terms of the timescale. What's the expectation around that?
Well, the work's underway just now, and I think we've sort of given commitments to try and look at that over the sort of summer holidays, certainly period, and reporting in and updates into the next Clinical Care Governance Committee, which is in August. Now, whether all of that will be done, but we will be bringing an update around assurance about where we're at with the different stages of it. But we're sort of confident it's been an interesting piece of work mapping out the complexities of it as well, and trying to look at how we can rationalise it and make sense of it as well.
That's right. Right, with that, I'll open it up to any questions or comments. Let's see if I've got any. No. Well, I think in that case, I wonder in terms of those questions that you've put forward, whether there's an opportunity for members to have a bit of a think about that, and if there's anything that they would like to feed in or ask questions about, that they're able to. Would that be yourself through contact, Suzanne?
Yep, that would be in the first instance, and would welcome any discussions if people
Yeah.
feel that would be helpful as well. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so I think that obviously that's a piece of work. I don't underestimate the complexity of it. Obviously asking for a timeline was more about just getting that right in my head. So if members would like to contact Suzanne directly for any questions or comments around that, and obviously that's a piece of ongoing work. Okay, well, in that case, I shall move on to agenda item 6, the annual assurance statement. That's Suzanne again.
Yep, thank you. So this report presents the second Clinical Care Governance Annual Assurance Statement for consideration and then approval to present the September IGB meeting. And for the IGB report itself, will contain all the annual assurance statements for the Audit Committee and the Joint Staff Forum, as well as Clinical Governance Committee. So the requirement for the annual assurance statement was from an internal audit governance mapping report in 2019, and that's briefly summarised in section 3 for your information. So the assurance statement sets out attendance, meeting dates, the committee business over 2020-2021, and through these meetings the partners can provide assurance to the committee on how services have ensured safe, efficient delivery of our health and social care services. So in conclusion, the committee is asked to approve the annual assurance statement and agree it's presented to the next IGB, and happy to take any questions.
Attempting to unmute myself. Thank you very much for that. I mean, I think looking at the appendices, I think, you know, that the amount of work that's been undertaken in the committee and for the committee. So I think probably to note to officers that my appreciation of the amount of activity that's been able to be undertaken and discussed. So in what has been what has been a very challenging year to 14 months. So thank you very much for that. So I'll open it up to any questions or comments. Wave your hand if you want to speak, or put something in chat. No further comments. Well, in that case, are we happy to approve the report to go forward to the IGB meeting? Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, I shall move on to agenda item 7, which is HSCP complaints and feedback report, and that's Elaine.
Thank you, Chair. So this is Falkirk's IGB Clinical and Care Governance Committee. Sorry, I'm a wee bit mixed up here. Complaints and feedback performance report, and it's for Q4, and that means it's for the period of January to March, so that's a kind of taking us to the end of the year. So complaints performance starting at section 4 on the report. I'm quite happy to do the whole report if that's okay, Chair, or do colleagues want to do the social work adult services part of the report, and I'll do the health, or do you want me to do all of that?
I think if you go ahead and others can chip in.
Absolutely. So section 4.1 shows the social work adult services report during the period, as I said, from January to March 21. There were 11 complaints received in total, which is a very small amount of complaints, so I'm asking colleagues to hold on to that number. There's detail provided in table 1 around an overall picture of complaints for SWAT, but stage 1 performance, you can see has been very good in how we do stage 1 complaints. Stage 2 performance is just from 100% down to 67. I ask colleagues to hold on to the small number of complaints, because that means if we have one complaint that takes a bit longer to respond to, it has quite an impact on the overall performance, and that's very much how we see that in health as well. So I'm asking colleagues to consider that. and I'm sure that locality managers will be able to take any questions around the performance or indeed any detail around that. Moving on to section 4.9, NHS Forth Valley, we're reporting on the same period of time, that's January to March 21, and there was a total of 7 complaints received through the patient relations team, and this is through the delegated functions for the Health and Social Care Partnership. We can see that the overall performance for complaints for stage 1 and stage 2 was 71.4%, which is above the national target of 70%. On analysis, we can see that we do very well with stage 1 complaints, and these are complaints or concerns that are raised and can be responded to within 5 days, and we see that we do very well around that. Stage 2, because of the small number, I think there's been 1 complaint that was a bit more complex in nature, and it's taken a bit longer to respond to, and that indeed has an impact on the overall performance there. But as I said, we're still meeting above the 70% national target. We can see in section 411 that there's a kind of breakdown of complaints for the committee to consider around the kind of performance, and we can see that there's 3 areas of focus and top themes for January to March, and actually they're no different, and there's no change in that for the committee's assurance for months gone by. I suppose the big thing at the moment is that how we can continue to understand the learning from complaints and how we analyse and how we drill into the detail of that. And that's what that we're very much focusing on in health at the moment. And we took to our clinical governance working group last week the real detail around that whole systems learning, and that very much scopes out into the partnership as well. And it's that when we've upheld a complaint where we're saying that, you know, we are going to do something in response, it's how we actually give real assurance that one, it's been done, and 2, that you know, there's ongoing focus so that does not happen again. So that's something, and I've made sure that in that report that it very much scopes right across the whole landscape, and it's not just for health, because that was really important. I think section 4.13 looks at the Ombudsman, Scottish Public Ombudsman services, and colleagues will note that we've kept in some historic data relating to Ombudsman, and I think moving forward for this report, Suzanne and I are going to look at a different way of reporting, so that we have a more joined up way of doing it, looking at the 9 key performance indicators that the complaints handling process looks at. So this should change the landscape of this report. But I think the Ombudsman stands aside the landscape of that report. But I think for colleagues, for assurance today, it's noting that from January to March, there was no complaints raised to the Ombudsman in relation to any of the complaints that have been dealt with for the Health and Social Care Partnership. And the kind of historic stuff around SPSO, I think it's good just to pause for a minute, if that's okay, just looking at the learning section on the right, Chair, because I think that it's really important that people take a bit of reflection around the learning in that element. And for assurance, that's it from the community hospitals. We took stock of that in February this year. We took a learning pause to stop and look and see how we had learned, had we embedded the learning, and was it still in play, the learning that we said that we were going to do, the changes that we had made, and we felt that was a very useful exercise. So as I say, this part of the report will change moving forward, but I just thought it was worth keeping in at this point, just because it's that care and clinical governance, it's that assurance and learning, so we've kept that in, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Stephen, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but Fiona has just asked if you could take over the chair. She's had to attend to an urgent matter. Thanks.
Thanks, Patricia. Sorry, I had that. I've got another screen open, so I never seen that. Yeah, well, that's a shame. Hope she's okay. Right, okay, that's fine. So any questions or comments on the complaints? No. And was that for approval? Yeah, we're happy to approve that. Thanks very much. So we're on to agenda item 8, which is the local oversight arrangements. Who's leading on that?
That's me, Stephen.
Back to you, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thanks very much. The board will be familiar with the purpose and layout of this report, which presents an overview of our local oversight arrangements that are relevant to the HSCP. And this report specifically includes an update on the Public Protection Chief Officers meeting, the Adult Support and Protection Committee, and we've also got some information on the work of the 3 subgroups of the committee, which are continuous improvement, communication and engagement, and learning and development, and those are set out in the body of the report. We've also provided an update on the Forth Valley clinical governance arrangements, and these are summarised at section 6 of the report. Our care assurance work has been summarised as well, and it really notes a range of activity that continues across the care home assurance work, and it's including the sort of updates on progress with our care home reviews, staff vaccination programmes, and care home visiting risk assessments, amongst other things. Section 8 provides an update on the alcohol and drug partnership as well for information. So it's quite a comprehensive and sort of detailed update in terms of a range of activity that's taken place for committee's information. So in summary, you're asked to note the report, and I've got colleagues here who from these various groups who could take questions if you have any specific things to ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, there's a lot in that, a lot of information there. Anyone get any questions? No? Okay, that's fine. So we're asked to note that report, so happy to note. Agenda item 9, which is overview of inspection reports and national publications. Is this you again, Suzanne?
Yeah, and that's me, I promise.
Okay.
So this again is another standing agenda item for committee, and so you'll be familiar with the layout of it, and it provides an overview of inspection reports and national publications that are relevant for the HSCP. So section 4 of the report notes that there have been no Mental Welfare Commission reports on services published since the last update committee. The Commission has, however, indicated that they'll carry out a themed visit programme across Scotland for people with a diagnosis of alcohol-related brain damage. This report will be due to be published in the summer, and an update will be provided to committee when that's done. We've also noted that there was a Healthcare Improvement Scotland published an unannounced inspection of Forth Valley Royal Hospital, which had a focus on COVID-19 infection prevention control. The inspection identified there were 4 areas of good practice, and there were 2 requirements, and further information about that set out in Appendix 1 for your information. In relation to the Care Inspectorate, they've carried out a full inspection of Burnbrae Care Home on the 5th of March, and this looked at the previous requirements from their inspection on the 5th of August 2019. The grade remains unchanged for that inspection, which is a 2, and 4.7 notes that the inspectors were assured with all the care in place for our residents. However, there are 6 requirements, and actions are summarised in the report at 4.12 to 4.17. Appendix 2 summarises the Care Inspectorate reports that are presented to the Scottish Parliament, and that appendix just covers those services that relate to Falkirk area. The inspections, like I say, have a focus on infection prevention and control measures specifically, and since the last report to committee there have been 3 reports of care homes in the local area, and that's summarised for your information. In terms of national publications, there are 5 national publications of interest to committee, and they're set out in Appendix 3. An update has also been provided in the body of the report to the Mental Welfare Commission report in relation to the investigation into the care and treatment of a woman with a learning disability. So it wasn't a Falkirk case, but it was of national interest. The report notes that the work has been concluded to review pathways with information being shared with relevant partners. So in summary, the committee is asked to note the report, and again, happy to take any questions with colleagues in attendance. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. Any questions for Suzanne? I suppose one question for me, Suzanne, or just in relation to Burnbrae, will we get a follow-up just in relation to when those recommendations have been completed. There's 6 requirements, I think, wasn't there?
Martin may be able to give a verbal update on that. Martin?
Is Martin there?
I would just note assurance that what we do anyway with these reports is we have a rolling update as part of this. So we not in addition to any new publications where there are still live or ongoing issues, we retain those in the appendices and provide a progress report against those. So Stephen, so you would see that in due course, but Martin's be able to join us.
That's fine, Martin. Sorry if we caught you unaware there. Do you want to add anything to that, or I'm happy the fact that will be followed up?
Yeah, I mean, sorry I couldn't get in there, couldn't get off mute for some reason. Yeah, I mean, we've put in additional management support to drive forward the recommendations, and we will give a full update. We could bring one to the next meeting actually around those specific actions that the managers have taken forward. But there has been a great deal of work over the recent weeks to get us back to a position where the grades will increase. And the management team are really hopeful that the next time the care inspectorate are out, we'll see a significant increase in those grades.
Okay, that's great, Martin. Thanks for that. So happy to note that. And moving on to agenda item 10, which is the hospital-acquired infection performance report, April 20 to March 21. Who's going to lead in that?
Sorry, Stephen,
That's right, Patricia, you've got your hand up.
Yep, could I just check with Brian and Sonia? Unfortunately, Councillor Colley is unable to rejoin the meeting. It was just to check that we're quoted.
Oh yeah, of course.
Sorry. I believe so, but while you're just talking, I'll just double check that.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Just like carry on. I'll just give me a second.
Thanks, Patricia. So who's going to lead on agenda item 10?
That'd be me, Stephen.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. So yes, this is the performance report, the annual performance report for April 20 to March 2021. I'll just go over very briefly about some of the key points to this, and maybe give some explanations about why we're reporting some of these things as well. But firstly, I'll just talk to you quickly about the pandemic. That's still ongoing, unfortunately. So if you can see on the graph on page 3 that we, initially we were in phase 1, we had quite a few, we had just over 60 inpatients at the first round of the COVID pandemic, and we had quite a sudden peak over the January, February period. This is where we felt that the advent of the new Kent variant, which had a higher level of transmissibility, and we had a number of outbreaks across the acute site, including Falkirk, Belsdyke and Bowness as well. So I'll go into a little bit of details of those later on in the report. So now we're in a much better place at the moment. There is fear about these new variants. I'm sure you've all heard in the press about the variants in Glasgow and in Moray and around England as well. So this is a bit of a concern. I mean, it's very similar to how the Kent variant entered the population and resulting in the peak of inpatient activity. We're not seeing that at the moment. We do have this variant in Forth Valley. It's in the community at the moment. So, we still have to remain very vigilant. I think our hospital admissions are low. We only have 1 inpatient currently today. So this is, so it's encouraging. I believe it's probably because if infections are spreading through the younger generations, they have less comorbidities and less susceptibilities for hospitalization and getting out of severe infection as well. There is no evidence to suggest that the vaccinations is ineffective against the new variants. A little bit of detail on that. I think you've all heard about the vaccines geared towards these spike proteins on the COVID virus. The new variant, like the Indian variant, that spike protein which the vaccine is targeted against is not so well exposed on the Indian variant. So there was a bit of concern about whether or not there's some, the efficacy of the vaccination, but apparently there's no evidence to suggest otherwise. So all is well. And I think that also reflects as well about the number of hospital admissions as well. We're not seeing it like we did with the Kent variant. So just moving on slightly, I mean, from since the pandemic as well, my team have been supporting the care homes, as Suzanne mentioned, providing support. Both we've been supporting the care inspectorates, during their inspections, as well as providing support to the care homes themselves. We are going to be stepping up that support. I hope most of you are aware that there's a new infection control manual for care homes being published on Monday, and there's some stakeholder events at the start of June and towards the end of June for our region, where and that will hopefully help care homes with their implementation. But we're going to be providing support there from an infection control point of view, so I can give you the committee that assurance, and I'll be able to report back on the next meeting and how things are developing from that. Very quickly on to the targets. Now, I won't go into a great deal about the targets because I'm concerned about boring you to death about the things. And basically, these targets are these 3 organisms that we currently have a target against from a national point of view. There's E. coli bacteremias, Staph aureus bacteremias, and Clostridium difficile infections. It's basically the fact that for the E. coli bacteremias and the Staph aureus bacteremias, these are the most commonly encountered infections in the blood, and because of that, then nationally it's been required to sort of do some enhanced reviews on all these patients, and also then as a targeted mechanism to sort of reduce these number of infections. In terms of the targets, we're heading in the right direction for all 3 of those organisms. Our E. coli's, we found there's a bit of a leap in infections, but that's not from the hospital, that's from the community side of things. And we think that the increase in that is to do with
Jonathan's frozen, I think.
Oh, sorry, I think I dipped out then.
Yeah, you're back now.
I'm back now. So yes, so I think there was a lot of media about saying, stay away from the NHS, protect the NHS, and so on. So I think that may have had a knock-on effect for people seeking interventions at an early stage, because we had a lot of urinary tract infections that developed into sepsis and so on. So, but I'll go into a little bit of detail of that later on. Quickly on the specifics, the targets, the Staph aureus bacteremias. We only had 1 bacteremia from Falkirk Community Hospital, but we couldn't identify the cause of the infection. So what we do when we do get a positive, we do quite an enhanced surveillance to all these types of infections. We work closely with the microbiologists, and we're just trying to see what caused the infection, because obviously the bacteria have got to get into the blood system, and so we try and find out whether or not there's a superficial infection, which has led to this to the bloodstream infection. However, we couldn't identify I've
lost you again, Jonathan.
So apologies for that. Quickly onto the device-associated bacteremias. This is an additional target that we've set locally. So we're looking at devices that have caused infections. And fortunately for the hospital, we saw a reduction of that over the last year. And Falkirk and Bowness, we had no reported cases for this year, which is good. Our E. coli bacteremias, I've gone into a bit of detail about that through, at the targets section of the report, so I won't go into that much detail, but we did have 1 infection reported in Unit 5 in Falkirk Community Hospital, which was a urinary tract infection which led to septicemia. Now, we're going to be looking into urinary tract infections. We had 7 reported cases over the hospital this year. So we're probing a little bit deeper into this, because I'm thinking whether or not there was any interventions that we could have prevented the urinary tract infection developing into septicemia. So that's some work I'm going to be doing this year. So hopefully we'll be able to report on our findings later on, and then perhaps in the next report. Clostridium difficile infections, again, we've reduced numbers quite significantly this year, and we had 1 reported case in Falkirk Community Hospital in Unit 1. Now, I just want to highlight to you about Clostridium difficile. They didn't acquire it in the ward per se, so they didn't catch it, if you like. Clostridium is a bacteria that lives in the gut in probably about 25–30% of the population, and if the patient's on quite broad spectrum antibiotics, it enables some of the bacterial flora of the intestine gets destroyed, because obviously the antibiotics are not specific. They just target any bacteria, and that enables the Clostridioides to proliferate and cause infection. So that's how this infection was developed. It's a bit like people sometimes suffer from thrush after having antibiotics. It's the same kind of principle with that. So moving on to the state and cleaning compliance. For a cleaning point of view, we've always been over the 90%, so we've been in green. The estates for Falkirk and Bowness, we're all heading in the right direction. There is an oversight group that looks over these things as the estates compliance group, and where we can look into trying to reduce the number of non-compliances detected. So we see we have gone up by marginally, but we've gone up by a couple of % over the 12-month period. And finally, just moving on, just going on over to the incidents and outbreaks, we had a number of infections in Falkirk and in Bowness and Bellsdyke. For whatever reason, we seem to have admitted a couple more outbreaks that I should report in this. So if the committee's happy, I can resubmit this report with the updated bits, because we did miss a couple of outbreaks in units 2 and 1 and 3, and I don't know why that hasn't come out on the report, so apologies there. But we did have a significant, we did have a number of outbreaks, and especially around the December, January, we believe that was from the new variant. We did have an early infection outbreak in Bowness, but that was pre-lockdown, and we attributed these infections to visitors at that time. So work is ongoing, and fortunately, we don't have any outbreaks at the moment across the piece. In terms of HEI inspections, as Suzanne said, they changed their focus to a very COVID-specific focus inspections. However, as things reduce in terms of activity with COVID, we do believe that they'll be visiting the community hospitals as well. So the wards are prepared for visits, and we provide weekly support to these areas just to ensure that standards are maintained throughout the period. So I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Jonathan, thanks for that comprehensive update. Any questions? Elaine?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for a lovely comprehensive report, Jonathan. Just one question, please, if that's okay. You mentioned across the hospital 7 cases of urinary sepsis. Is that across Bowness and Falkirk?
It's predominant. No, it's only the one. I was just highlighting that it was in the acute hospital in Larbert. There was only the one case in Falkirk, which was attributed to a lower UTI infection. But I just wanted to highlight that I think there's something that we could perhaps do to sort of create some sort of interventions. And so we're just looking in a little bit deeper at these. We're doing a deeper dive into these infections, just so we can perhaps get some learning from it and maybe put some interventions in place that we can reduce these kind of infections.
Thank you for the clarity on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Jonathan. Any other questions for Jonathan? Patricia?
Yes. The report, I'm very mindful, the report is about hospital-acquired infection, and we are doing a phenomenal amount of work across the partnerships in NHS Forth Valley with Jonathan and other colleagues around care homes, and have been for the last 13, 14 months. And we have reported to this group, but I'm just wondering, Jonathan, if we should be providing an appendix to this or a separate report just around the care homes and our progress with COVID.
Yes. Absolutely, I was quite conscious about, you know, that's why I wanted to highlight to you, you know, that we can do more detailed report on that. But I'm happy to do that for the next meeting. Yes,
I think that would be really helpful if the chair, vice chair's happy with that.
No, good idea, Patricia. I think that would be worthwhile just to get a view of what's happening within care homes. Thank you for that. Any other questions for Jonathan? Thanks, Jonathan. I mean, obviously the variants are of concern, but I suppose it's looking at the moment the vaccines are holding up, which is good. So I think we're happy to note that report, although you are going to update it with a couple of the outbreaks that we're missing, and then we can perhaps just bring back to formally acknowledge that. Thanks very much. Folks, we're moving on to the next section, but we're under obviously the Local Government Scotland Act. Section 50A, subsection 4, we're excluding the public and the press because for the following items: business on the grounds that they involve the disclosure of exempt information as defined on paragraphs 1 and 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 7A of that particular Act. Brian has confirmed that we are, since I'm here, we are quoted. So just, Brian, the mechanics, we're just moving into I suppose a private session.
That's correct. So I'm just going to stop the recording.